Hey, welcome back to our series on how to use the lenses tool in Bodies and Structures 2.0. So this is the, let's say, fourth screencast in this series. And in this screencast, we're going to look at how to create a lens where you're visualizing all of the pages that have a particular text string, a particular word or phrase, and then how we can further explore the site and its particular mappings of modern East Asian history through that grid. Right, so we're starting here, our old home, the very beginning of the Bodies and Structures 2.0 book, and we're going to go up here to our compass tool, or our compass menu, mouse down to lenses, and mouse over to manage lenses. All right, here we are in the lens editor, and we're going to go ahead and add a lens. We'll see that pop up here. It says lens untitled. And we will click on the title to open it up in a new tab. All right, so first thing let's do is let's give it a title so we can find it later if we want to. To do with a, let's call it what to do with the text string. All right, so here's what I've put together. Let's start by asking the lens to return our results as a grid. And then we're going to get all of the items that we can find of a particular type. And that is everything. So all of the site's content, but of course that's too much. So we're going to add a filter, and we're going to filter by content. This is where you can put in a text string. We're only going to allow items through that contain the word colonial. Now, of course, you could also do don't contain, right? If you wanted to exclude something. And this can be particularly useful for word clouds. Okay, so let's click on done. It's going to pull up all of the content that contains colonial. Great, so we get 133 results. Some of these are pathways, right? These are the blue boxes. Some are pages. These are the kind of beige yellow boxes. And then a couple are tags here. So first we can see that there's a lot of different approaches to colonialism and the history of colonialism and thinking about its effects, particularly when it comes to spatial history. That's obvious by the number of pages that address it, and also the number of contexts. But the thing I want to show you today is actually how you can use a text string search to see how we as a collective have thought about the significance of colonial history, ideas of the colonial, effects of colonialism, etc., coloniality, basically, in modern East Asian history. So let's go ahead and add a little more content to this, okay? We're going to do the plus button, and actually what we're going to do is we're going to filter it even more is what it really is. We're going to add a filter, and we're also going to let through our filter pages defined by their relationship with pages that have the word colonial. So we want to do all types of pages that are parents. So any pages that are parents of these items, right? These original 133 pages that we pulled up that have the phrase colonial in them. We could also look for just tags, right? So tag parents of these items, and that would give you results just based on what we've done with the tag map. This is a little bit of a wider search. It's also going to show us the tag relationships, but it's going to show us other things as well. All right, so let's hit done. We'll just do our little do elevator music, hold music, song. All right, so now we have 243 hits, right? So not quite doubling, but much bigger. Now this grid, just to review, it's visualizing in a grid all of the content But we're filtering out everything except for those pages that contain the word colonial and their parents, right? So what do we have? Well, I went through a little bit earlier so I could, figure out something interesting to show you. You can, of course, explore and follow the same process to find your own intriguing juxtapositions. The first place I'll start is with a page from Sakura Christmas's module called Touring with Man Air. And this is about Manchukuo Airlines in the 1930s in Japanese-controlled Manchuria, and how this airline was really part of visualizing the empire in a particular way, and also expanding the empire in some very important ways. So Touring with Man Air is a magazine, and so it's probably no surprise that this page is tagged by media. It's tagged by race and ethnicity, because a lot of media, anybody who works in this field knows that Japanese-produced media about Manchuria is heavily tied up in representations of race and ethnicity and engaged in the process of racialization for the purposes of legitimating particular strategies for control. It's also tagged by territorial rationality. So this means that either the magazine, the primary source that Sakura Christmas is talking about, or the analysis that she's doing has to do with seeing the world as discrete chunks of territory, right? So thinking territorially about the world and using that as a logic to justify actions or ideologies. Transport devices, because we're talking about airplanes. And then mapping, because all of these ideas, the media space, the racialization, the territorial rationality, right? It's all ways of mapping Manchuria into the Japanese Empire, but also mapping the Japanese Empire onto the world in a particular way. So that's one thing we can discover, right? We could have gone through each of these tags from the top down and seen after many clicks, like, oh, this page is part of all of them. Or we could have seen this from the page itself, right? But this is one way to kind of set up a research environment where you're taking things that you might find, you might think are familiar, and then putting them, looking at their tags and poking around, and then encouraging yourself to think about them in a slightly wider context. So the next example I'm going to give, I think, really demonstrates this. So we'll go ahead and click on Touring Man Air again to turn off its links, its connections. And I want to go to a page called Seiyoga. And Seiyoga is oftentimes thought of as Western-style oil painting. And it's in contrast to Nihonga, like Japanese-style painting, or Toyoga, which is another sort of quote-unquote Oriental-style oil painting, which is another term that comes up in the 20s and 30s. So how has Seiyoga been tagged? Well, we can see underneath here, it's tagged by taxonomic rationality, because of course one of the rationalities that's operating here is dividing up the world into different artistic traditions. Or dividing the art world, I should say, up into different artistic traditions and classifying paintings, right, as being either part of tradition A or tradition B. Also part of network rationality. So how is it that a painting or a painting style is part of a network rationality? That's interesting. And then borderlands, because I think you'll see if you read Magdalena Kolodziej's module, which is where this comes from, you'll see that some of these artistic styles that we now think of as being either firmly part of tradition A or tradition B actually were a borderlands where these distinctions were being worked out in real time. So let's go back. This page is tagged by network rationality, and that's maybe the most kind of counterintuitive or least obvious tag here. So let's just visit that page and see if we can figure out why it's tagged network rationality. Here it comes. So now if you were reading this, it would take you a little more time. Probably I planned ahead for this screencast, so I will jump right into what I found, what led us to tag this network rationality. And here it's Magdalena writing, in principle, the distinction between Nihonga and Seiyoga was based on the medium and the presumed set of traditions and masters each mode was indebted to, not on a painter's nationality or the painting subject matter. Right, so part of what makes a painting Seiyoga, right, is the student-teacher relationships, like the network of educating each generation of painter, right? Rather than where the painting was made, what material it refers, or what sort of content it refers to, what it represents. And some of this has to do with the style, but a lot of it has to do with the tradition that you're coming from, the community of practice that you're coming from. So really what we find here is that Sei-yoga, which is a painting style, is also part of a particular way of spatializing the world from the perspective of the artists themselves, who are thinking about the different lineages, right, the different networks that they are a part of that give them the authority to claim themselves as Sei-yoga painters. So let's go back to the lens. So this is just, a couple of examples of the kinds of explorations you can do with starting with a text string that you think you're pretty familiar about all of the things that fall under it, and then really push against the boundaries of your own expectations. So thanks so much for hanging out for this screencast. I'll be back with 2 more, and then you'll be off to the races playing around with lenses yourself. Thanks so much.